Tonight's news is, as always, is about the same thing, about one thing. Tonight it appears to be about a whole bunch of things. Captivity, the insides and outsides, the universal and the local. It's a whole bunch of crap, but it's all about the same thing again. Just thought I'd mention it. There was once a king whose castle had a curious characteristic. The more activity there was inside, the less protected it was. Only the universe can afford to be repetitive, and that's because it lives longer than man. If there is a possibility of any freedom by adopting beliefs to live by, men squander it. There was once a balloon whose inside sucked all the tensile strength from its outsides. One man was once struck with the possibility that habitual thinking might be the supreme form of hypnosis. A two-eyed man is always in prison. Bullets are not the problem. Being shot repeatedly is. Only at the local level do the insides and outsides of things exist. Energy wants to congregate in one place at a time. Once they realize their mental captivity, some men then try and think only of freedom, which proves most difficult, while others try to not think at all, which seems impossible, and still a few others pursue a more lucrative course, which short-circuits the shortcomings of the first two, and struggle simply not to permit themselves to think anything they have already thought before. A philosopher and a warrior took a stroll together, and each was in their own particular danger. Local conditions limit consciousness by saying, "Look over here." And once a man does, it says again, "Look over here." And if a man does again, he's finished. One reason that art tends to annoy the ordinary is because it is too unpredictable. The Athenians didn't kill Socrates because he repeated himself, but because he made them do so. A toxology report. There is no poison that will kill a man in a single dose. In one man's house, the more he concentrated the heat in the center, the more vulnerable became the exterior walls. Nothing can be properly condemned without a modifier, e.g., thought is not the problem, but rather habitual thought. One man attempted not to stare. Another man attempted not to stare at things he believed encouraged staring. And a third man simply attempted not to stare at the same thing twice. Regarding weariness and battle fatigue, being alive can only get you down at the local level, never the universal. A prisoner is only trapped if he sees only one side of the bars. Question: if there was suicide for the mind, who would avail himself? Thought one man, all I have to lose is the repetition of myself. The energy of a vessel will locate where it is directed. Is this a night for dramatic theatrics or what? I just hope the Spirit of the Lord don't hit me and really make me drunk. Men are willing to sacrifice almost anything except habitual thought. Should we say willing or prepared or able? What difference does it make? Comes out the same. Says one man, sometimes it seems complex and sometimes it seems simple. And when I'm feeling weak, I prefer that it seem complex. Oh. One man says that he's begun to see his body as living at the universal level and his mind at the local. But since his body can't think, it can't benefit from having this knowledge about itself. While, since the mind can think, it's able to suffer from knowing this about itself. Is this fair, he asks? Then goes on to figure that somehow it must be. Creatures silent born know not the captivity of the speaking. To go to sleep, all that's necessary is to count to 2 and stay there. Men sing the praises of patience without truly knowing why, which is that it represents a subtle counteraction to habit. If you insist. The speaker presented his listeners with this question: why is it easier to stalk and surprise a man than it is any wild animal? Men early learn that if you stare, captivity seems not so apparent. Why do the ordinary find verbal veracity to be a problem? Don't repeat yourself, and you can't lie. Why? You can't find it. The original book of secret knowledge had to be destroyed after the first person read it. One man spells prison Habit. If consciousness had any beliefs to live by, they could be described in one word. One man spells ignorance Habit. One man told himself, you should get out more. Or maybe it was his mind he said it to. No. And one really perceptive man spells torment and dissatisfaction as Habit. To have a mind but never original thoughts is akin to having sex but never a climax. Ignorance is reinforced by repetition, and if you think knowledge is also, you're ignorant. Only the uninformed say, let me out of here, I want to be free, out loud. It is almost impossible to converse and at the same time be creative. Speech begs repetition. All prisons are local, and seeing the universal will set you free from the likes of them. Even those who finally get on the mythical train can find themselves too enthralled with a repetitive study of its interior. Is this why the mystical knights have been historically pictured as being on horseback, out in the open, with nothing between them and the open? When prisoners have no intention of trying to escape, they prefer hearing descriptions thereabout to be as lengthy as possible. There is no difference between Plato and pulp fiction if they both result in habitual thought. Yeah. The difference between heredity and environment is that the former is eternal and gives continuing rebirth to the latter. Escape is not possible from the ephemeral. How can thought that is not original be called thought? Why there's so little unrest? If everyone around seems to be in prison too, then who cares? In the life of a conscious mind, there is no second time. The story of one man's confinement. He used to bounce balls off his cell walls until they turned into hand grenades. Yeah. One man learned to roll his eyes to the back of his head so that his sight was not single-directional limited. First stage, strip down. Captivity, complex. Freedom, simple. There are two ways to build a dam, from the inside or from the outside. P.S. There's also a third. Final simplifying. Captivity, local. Freedom, universal. The problem in asking for help comes when you do so more than once. If you're dead, you don't need help. Since we started doing these tapings, I talk more and more around about and less specific, which started out for assumed good reasons, but I don't know what they are. I don't know whether it does any good. All the items tonight were about something, and something I can describe specifically. For anyone to seriously get involved with an attempt to undergo some internal transformation when they're alive, whatever term they pick up, which they shouldn't have picked up, but they did. So whatever you think of it, it ends up, if you can pursue it past the point of simply adopting or trying to affix yourself to some apparent belief system, such as carrying around a card saying that you are indeed a student of Zen, but shh, don't tell anybody. If you get past that point, if anyone gets past that point and they actually try and avail themselves of some discipline, of some method, we all know that the methods in description vary greatly. The only way that someone can raise a new audience at any time, at any place, is to apparently have something new. Not totally new, not original, but to have what sounds to be new after they first put out the come on, after they first announce, my friends, we are obviously at a dire junction in the history of man, but on the other hand, I feel as though there is a possibility that we are also possibly entering a new age of spirituality. That's always been the basic cry. And usually all you got to do is do the first one. Just to holler, Jerusalem, Rome, Indianapolis is collapsing. We're all done for. And even before we're done for, you'd be lucky, but before you're done for, the Huns will be running in the streets and they'll tear down all of our important buildings, and they'll come in and rape all of your good CDs and burn your books, and you'll hate it. You'll be humiliated. Then they go, well, boy, I'm glad I found you. So if you get past that point and they actually try and adopt something, the description has to be new. As witnessed by, as I pointed out, one of the oldest publicly known, we'll just stick with that, is the attempt to remember the infinite names of Shiva, of God. And after that, it's gone through many versions, and one of the latest being that was brought to the West, is for a man to attempt at all times to remember himself. Now let me describe to you, before I tell you what I'm pointing at, what that amounts to, all of those. The attempt to remember one's breath, oneself, is normally given as being some part of a continuing peripatetic existence that is not a life of a recluse, and it's not simply a sitting attempt. It's not just passive meditation, stable meditation. But they all amount to the same thing, because what they're attempting to do is in some way affect the normal flow of thinking, that which goes through the mind. And a news item tonight, and one of them, I narrowed it down for you. When people discover that they are in a kind of mental captivity, they don't have to use my description, but if anyone stays with this sort of thing, if anyone pursued, if they were wired up to pursue any religion down to its seed, to pursue any known mystical system to its core, and found out something, made some personal discovery, the first discovery is that the captivity, the feeling of discomfort, the feeling of torment, to whatever degree you like it, is all based in one's head. This is not to be confused and does not belie the fact that many people are wired up below the cortical level to be tormented and full of discomfort. To walk around generally living out 65 years of singing at I've got the red ass blues. But that really has nothing to do with this initially. Because what your apparent repertoire of moods is, until you know better, is beyond the purview of a would-be mystical system or an apparent mystical system. If you're satisfied to believe that that can be directly affected, then you belong truly in a religion. You belong somewhere operating on the basis of faith, that we don't know what to do about you being such a rotten bastard, but come to church, come to temple, and we'll all pray for you and contribute, and we'll do our best, and at least God will understand. Past that point, not that there's not anything can be done about that, but you cannot start off there. Past that point, everyone discovers that this feeling that they have, this itching they have, the idea of searching for some lost treasure, the hunger for the grail, the secret of life, is also based upon the fact that one is confined, that one is locked into some position, that one cannot move. And most people never get past the point of taking that physically, which is the historical and continuing external cries of people saying, I want to be free. And they apply it to social structures, the political order, which is just a hobby, has nothing to do with this. So, I am now referring to those that reach the point to individually discover that their confinement is mental. It's in their head, no matter what they want to call it. That is what is struggling to get out. That is the nascent mystical warriors. That would be the burgeoning knights seeking a grail. But first they got to get out of the goddamn castle. They have got to, which you can see, once you know how, you can see all of the man's mythologies about such searches are also tied to the fact that for a long time, and in some stories it never gets past that point, but that the person seeking the treasure never has a clear enough idea of the treasure to get started. And they end up pacing around their village or the castle. Where do I start? Where am I going? And no one can seem to tell them exactly. And therefore the story oftentimes just kind of peters out, and they suddenly whip a moral on it. Like sticking an aftermarket bumper that doesn't fit and not made for the model on a car of which your ass got knocked off. Yeah. That's what morals normally are. Anybody wants to try and untangle that one. But once a person discovers that the captivity, the reason that they can't get anywhere, is in their head, then one way or the other they will stumble upon two main attempts. And they have already by then have been exposed to it, but I was just describing it in my own terms tonight. The first is they decide not to think, the way I put it in the news item was, once someone understands and realizes the nature of the mental captivity, some men then try and think of nothing except ideas of freedom, which is the same thing as deciding I will think of nothing but God loves me. I will think of nothing but the blessed face of Buddha. I will think of nothing but Muhammad pointing. I will think of nothing but my breath. I will think of nothing except the fact that I exist. All of this is an attempt to alter, to interfere with the normal flow of activity in one's head. It goes under a myriad of names, and it is taken to be otherworldly. It's taken to be so esoteric as to be labeled indescribable. But how do you explain the fact that I just described it? It is an attempt for a man to, let me take the one that might seem to be the furthest removed, for someone to adopt a method, for someone to hear it, and I am by no means ridiculing it because I understand its appeal, and everyone goes through some stages of it, whether they get out past it or not. But someone hears the idea that what a man needs to do is in some way focus his consciousness. Or it may have a more spiritual sounding, a more metaphysical patina to the description. And so let us say, I'm trying to take one far away removed on the surface from the way I'm going to describe it, but let us say that it's the ancient, the good old hoary one of that a man's responsibility, a man would undergo a transformation, could he at all times remember the name of God, or if you like it a little more enriched, the infinite names of God. Gives you kind of something to work for. So you can take it either way. It's according to what degree you're prepared or you wish to be immediately disappointed. That is, to remember the one name of God, Yahweh or Jehovah, to remember the one name of God continually, no matter what's going on, either that, one, or either that, or remember the infinite names of God. A little metaphysical humor there, but they might sound like two different things. That was my attempted little humor. It's according to how driven you are to seek out additional, even at the transcendental level of, I will assume, delightfully inflicted masochistic blows to one's psyche. Well, let's see. Do I have my choice? And I will try with each breath to remember the one name of God. I like that one. And someone else who fears, what if I could do that? The game would be over. They say, well, if I'll take the infinite number. Back to the serious matter. All of those in operation, in function, have nothing to do with the thing, the word, the idea to which one is trying to apply one's constant memory. To ordinary people it does, but now you should understand that. But to say that a man could undergo a transformation, could he continually remember the secret or the blessed name of God, of Jesus, of Abraham, of Muhammad? But it is the same thing if a man could continually remember the name of his favorite fruit. And if that still leaves the field too wide open and you're staying there, then I'll give it to you. An apricot, damn it! Remember apricot. Now you're happy. It is the same, operationally speaking, it is exactly the same thing. But now from the side, I assume you people can furnish some of your own intellectual stimulation by considering the fact, I'll go ahead and point out what should be obvious. If you tried to encourage people for some generally specified transcendental possibility to remember the name of God or the word apricot, and you let them have their choice, you know what the score would come, the vote would come out. 0 to however many people voted. Just a little side interest. But why is it that you could get people prepared to do it, and you give them some little lead into it and say what we're going to do, what I'm going to encourage you to do, and I'm going to give you a few little tricks and show you some methods. But what a man must do is continually, no matter what's going on in your life, no matter what your mind, no matter what kind of games, what kind of pictures, what kind of scenes, what kind of dialogues, what kind of lyrics, what kind of songs it is continuing to sing. Throughout it all, you'll find out that you can create. It takes a while, but you can create like a stable point, but you've got to have something to think. And here's what I want you to do. No matter what's going on, I want you to think apricot. You may have that and go out, but don't give up your day job if you're going to try to use that to attract a following. People just, and you say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean apricot, I meant Allah, Shiva. And they go, oh, well, that's what we were expecting. I figured you just misspoke. Yes, I did. I mean, it's easy to confuse apricot and Allah. 2 A's. Could have been worse now I think about it. Those of you who don't remember the class who was writing a thank you letter to life. That constitutes one of the 2 major groups into which men have divided themselves, into which life has had them divide themselves, even should they get so far as to try and undertake their own evolution and discover that it does not come from my soul, it does not come from my spirit, it does not come from my heart, it comes from the head. That's the only place that the nervous system can be affected. That is the only place in which any part of man is less than complete. It is the only place in which man has any possibility of an alteration. So the first group is, once they discover that my mind is out of control, because that takes a long time. You tell people their mind's out of control and you get average people to go, by and large you're correct, and they'll agree. But it takes, as many of you know, it takes more than 2 or 3 years for a man to really understand that to call the mind out of control is just get people's attention. Because that doesn't begin to cover it. What you've got to realize is that what you've been carrying around is almost like a box somebody gave you. For those of you who haven't paid much attention to all the numerous news items over the last several months about a race of creatures on one planet that walked around that had a talking bird on their head, same thing. Last time we met, I believe there was a story about a man who had carried around a box that was filled with great activity. Sometimes he didn't know what to call the box, and sometimes he forgot where he got it from. But there was one thing about which there was no doubt. The box was now his. Now, anyway, to say that a man's mind is out of control, or for a man to say, yes, my mind to some degree, which a sane person, they can't say their mind's out of control, because it's not to them. But they can say that, yes, by and large, my mind does run on a kind of fairly prevalent mechanical energy. I can have my neural activity as tied up with repetitive thinking, chasing off on some idée fixe. I can do that as well as the next man. That, yes, you're correct to some degree. In fact, I'll admit to a disturbing degree, now that you mention it, my mind is out of control. And that sounds as though it's almost an insightful, psychologically speaking, some sort of insightful comment, and it's not. Because everybody's mind's like that. And for someone to say, well, to some degree mine is, what you really need to discover is in yourself the story of a man who carried around a box that was filled with great activity, and he didn't know the name of it, and sometimes he forgot where he got it, but there was one thing for damn sure, it was his now. That's what you got to realize, that you got it, but to say my mind is out of control, you still don't have it. Because you're still saying my mind is out of control. Your mind is in perfect control if you are passing for an ordinary person. You are living by the do-right rule, which encompasses people who say, well, mentally I'm not doing right. Very good, very good. Sorry, you don't get out of class on that one. Yeah, but sometimes I don't even like the way my mind works. I heard you the first time, but no slip, you're not getting out. You're stuck here with everybody else. And don't ask me again when recess is. I told you, based on your age, I'd say about, 43, 46 years. Then you can go to lunch. If they discover that the captivity is mental, then the first group is exemplified by the idea of trying to remember one's breath, trying to be conscious of each and every breath, which may seem far removed from the mind, but it's the same thing. It's to interfere with that flow. The second group I described in the news item attempts to not think, which is the general classification of non-peripatetic meditation, sitting down in one place meditation, is probably best represented by the Zen meditation, the descriptions of it, of attempting to sit physically still to such a degree, and maybe it give your mind something, a conundrum, a non sequitur, something that is harder for the mind to process in a mechanical way, the colon. It's to sit there with that, but what you're really looking after, if you could do it, is to stop the mind. It's to stop thought, that clear reflective lake in the Zen pictures. So you have two main groups, that once you see what it is, once you realize that all ideas of me reaching some transcendental state, all ideas of me understanding the secret, all ideas of me being able to look directly into life and to see what's going on, you have to find out for yourself that as long as this is your primary realm of consciousness, your mind, no matter what it is, and it doesn't make any difference, any descriptions of what you think or how mechanical you think it is or how destructive, how sad, whatever, all of that's of no consequence. None whatsoever. It's just a box with a great deal of activity in it. Once you understand that yourself, that any idea of going off on some great mystical quest, any idea of finding some lost treasure, any idea of actually transforming yourself, not being able to live by some externally voiced or described system, but that you internally move, that you actually affect an alteration in the structure of your nervous system while you're alive. Enlightenment, the liberation of the mind, all of that. A person, once you understand that you're not going to get anywhere, as long as this is the extent of your consciousness. Whatever is in you, it doesn't make one royal goddamn. But if that's it, you have to find it for yourself. As long as that's running, and I'm not anything else, this is the minimal discovery. You understand everything I've done, everything I will do is a dream. It may be pleasant, I may enjoy it, but you might as well face it. Why hold back? Go buy a turban, buy a robe, paint your face up, take on a new name, call yourself Dr. Sunbeam, start some mystical group, because you're not going anywhere. It's simply a delightful, I assume in your case, a pleasurable hobby. As long as you think that as you are, if this is all you've got, it's what's going on, what you were born with, what you find yourself walking around with at some age, by the time your parents said, well, you're getting to be a regular little man or woman, and you stood upright, and it was like the first time, like you're holding your little hat box, except there's not a hat in it. Close. Physically speaking, geographically speaking, close, but it's this box. And you go, yes, I'm a little man. That's it. And when you realize this has always been there, and if it has a name, its name is repetition. Its name is habitual thought. Its name is not me. Its name is a box full of great activity. So each person has to realize for themselves, they just have to see it, that any idea, any notion I have of some real change in my state, internally, no one have any knowledge of it with me. It is not a change in the way I dress, not a change in my name, it's not a change in my behavior. That's not what brings it on, although those things might be some result. But you understand, you've got to find it for yourself. As long as this is the extent of me, if that's it, no matter what me you are, no matter if you've got an IQ that registers on the Sanford Binet in the high percentiles, way up, 200, if you're much talented and admired by the world, none of that matters. You've got to see for yourself. If that's the extent of you, you're finished. You're a dead man. You might as well lay down. You might as well give it up, at least give up the dream. So, then a person after that, it may come back to them, some of the descriptions, but what I want you to see is, and a lot of people listening to me throughout the years, they've already been through one or two. I may have staggered back and forth. But once they realize that, then many people latch on to the idea of trying to remember the name of Buddha, trying to remember the face of Allah, trying to remember themselves, just trying to remember, just the impartial knowledge, I'm here no matter what's going on inside of me, I'm here. Because it separates, to whatever extent you can do it, you do become aware. It's not an instantaneous, because you can get ordinary people to do it, and they go, so? You can say, all right, you know, just your mind going on now, just try not to fool with it. Just if you told people this is a nice little interesting little parlor trick, just try it. And they go, okay. You go, all right, your mind is running right now, right? Which is kind of dirty because they go, and it seems to stop. And you go, well, it'll get back. It'll get going. And they go, oh, okay. And you go, all right, don't try to interfere with it, but just for the next 15 seconds, just let it, as soon as I quit talking, just kind of look off and it'll take over. Trust me. No problem. It'll take over. But for 15 seconds after that, just don't interfere with it. Don't try to affect it in any way, but at the same time, think apricot. And they can do it for a few seconds. And they realize my mind can do two things at once. It can go on like it is, and it just goes. Of course, I can describe this, and I've done it so many times that many of you have no idea that you know what I'm talking about. To describe this to an ordinary sane person, for the first time, for the first 100 times, it still eludes them. And you say, all right, your mind can just run on. And they go, well, all right, because they don't even like that description. Their mind doesn't. I say they don't. Their mind doesn't like it. To tell the mind, well, go ahead and just run on like you do ordinarily without any effort. The mind thinks, what the hell is that? As it should, it is defensive, and it, so like, no, that's not true. But if you tell a person about let their mind run, and for 15 seconds, don't interfere, and simply simultaneously think apricot, they can do it. And of course, what I'm describing to you is you realize this box can continue to operate. It's like a radio playing right here, and you think it's in here, or you think it's in you, but then you do it, and it's as though the radio sits there, and at the same time, it can keep going for a few seconds. It can go, and you can sit at the same time think radio. And suddenly the radio is not the extent of you. And so a person can do that, and they get through, and they say, is it time up? And you go, yeah. And if you were dumb enough to solicit in some passionate way, like, what do you think? What do you think? This is the extent. If they go, so? They might say, interesting. You got anything to eat? Know any more tricks? It doesn't strike anybody that that could be of any possible significance. None whatsoever. So that's why I say a person has got to come to it on their own. And even people who, and there are people that you can describe that to, when I said the first time won't help or the first 100 times, there are people you can describe that to that will. If they say they've never heard it, they will hear it. And there are a few people that go, Jesus, that, ooh. In other words, it strikes them as being of significance, but that still doesn't mean anything. As many of you know, because it can be of obvious, undeniable significance. But something can be personally of obvious, undeniable significance for 20 or 30 years before the significance on it really goes. It's like one description of enlightenment is after all the struggles, a Buddha looks down and he goes, well, I'll be damned, I got 2 feet. There's enlightenment for you. Of course, he looks down and he thinks I got 2 feet, but he does it without thinking about it. The first group, the first general group, they attempt to think, to bring in something unnecessary, like the name of God. For part of the intrigue is, to most people is, well, hey, what do you mean unnecessary? That would do anyone well. That would sit good with anyone to try and remember something decent. But if you say, well, try and remember apricot. Try to remember cow chips. Why? Well, just try it. No, I don't want to. All right, think about the benevolent face of Buddha. Oh, okay, now we're getting somewhere. Okay, do that then. They attempt to hold one thing in their mind, but what it does, without them knowing it or not, is to distract, to subtract, to diminish the mechanical running. Now that, by any definition, even by a non-standard definition, is not an untoward approach. It holds promise. But then there are other people who will take the approach of, and it almost, I can make it appear to be a superior approach to that, is let's bypass all that. Don't worry about trying to interfere with that mechanical thinking. By trying to diminish its power, by trying to deflect or subtract some of its energy by thinking of the name of Buddha, by remembering that you're here, by counting your breaths. Rather than just trying to slowly weaken its energy, let's just take all energy away from it and not think. Need I point out, the news on the way it put it was the groups, is one group once men understand their captivity. One group will attempt then to think only of things having to do with freedom, parentheses, which is most difficult, is the way I put it, being the charitable bastard that I am. The other group, the second group, will attempt to not think, comma, parentheses, which seems impossible. Carrying on in our charitable tradition. So that would seem to cover the two. One of them seems most difficult, no one appears almost impossible. And no one, of course, has to take my word for it. All you got to do is try. And we'll take a few seconds out if anybody wants to. And don't think anything. And then, everyone who realizes that I lied to you, I misspoke, that it's quite possible, you may raise your hand and take over the stage, as a matter of fact. At any rate, there seems to be the two ways. That has been historically, without me trying to give you a pseudo-historical coverage again of the metaphysical history of man, that covers everything from prayer to meditation to whirling to sitting to postures to the psychic effects of fasting to the attempted psychic uses of a restriction of sexual energy. Anything you've ever heard of, once you see it for yourself, fits into one of those two general categories of the attempt to alter, to interfere, to diminish, or to stop. It's all the same attempt. That flow that seems to be one's consciousness, that seems to be one's individuality. Because everybody understands that. You're not even up to the level of routine civility and sophistication if you don't clearly understand that it's only in the mind that a man has any sense of individuality. You certainly can say, well, you know that you're taller than the people next to you, or that you're fatter than the average, but if that is the extent of your sensation of individuality, then you probably wouldn't even have a television and be watching it. But you understand that is just not even up to the average level of sophistication and development of the human nervous system. So those two would seem to cover it. And yet I threw in a third, which I was trying to get to in my dramatics tonight, and the story about a king whose castle had a curious characteristic. The greater the activity inside, the less protection it had. You end up, and it's almost a foregone conclusion, that you will end up cooped up too much, staying in far too much. Because if a man is going to work on consciousness, if indeed I'm giving a fair description, and after years and years and years of fooling around and trying this and that and listening and pondering, that it strikes him that this whole thing does not come down to a secret book that's been lost. It does not come down to a conspiratorial panel of 12 old men in the mountains of Tibet or in the Andes. It does not come down to a man that some guru sent to me who will finally knock upon my door on a cold, dark night at 3 in the morning, say, "My son, the time is right." Or Or if the weather's a little bit better, perhaps a flying saucer will come to your backyard and a little ET will come and say, "We've been watching you. We just waited until the time is right." Now I know it just warms everyone's cockles. Well, and especially the cockles of your imagination. For a man to realize that there is only one place that a great secret effort, a quest, a grail exists. And it's been with me all this time. Boy, what a breathtaking discovery. I mean, it really sends many people off on a sometimes several hour fest. Some people have to lay down and put a cold tourniquet on their head, but it's your business. It's your business. Some people go out looking for a prune Danish, but those kinds of transcendental experiences affect various peoples in sundry ways. And if not that, it affects sundry people in various ways. It's just all according to you know what. How things are. Exactly. I was going ahead and point out there is an energy, and I am tempted to describe it in terms of blood flow from the brain, but I don't think I will. So ignore that. There is a flow of energy. You know, I started out threatening to talk more directly at night, but you knew I was lying. Does anybody remember one time I was mentioning in some news item or in some, it was not on this specific subject, but I used an example that as you drive along the highways of life, you can observe people walking. It can be out on rural roads, it can be in city streets, on sidewalks, and people walking along, and you're going in the same direction in traffic. And some people, they just hear a car coming, and they continue, even as they're walking, they're looking over their shoulder. And other people will walk along and never look back. Part of what I pointed out at the time, again, not for the reason I'm about to, but I pointed out that was based upon whether the degree of simplicity of the person's wiring system. Put it to you very directly, what the ordinary minds refer to as the lower socio-economic classes. I would say it's people whose center of orientation still lies primarily in the red wiring circuits. Simple, physical people. You know, that's no criticism, but it is a simple fact that it is the more simple people. If you had just ordinary, the simple people of the world, you've got bricklayers, the unemployed, walking down the street, on one street. And on another street, walking down the street, for God knows why, we have philosophers, we have college professors, we have attorneys, we have theologians, we have people whose wiring system, the center of it, is going to be above the physical survival level, will be into the blue or into the yellow circuitry, intellectuals. I submit to you that the second group will scarce ever turn their head as they walk. They just walk along. Whereas the first group, good physical, just ordinary people, will continually be looking over their shoulder. And when I did that, for the reason we're going to drag up, it caught several people's attention. I heard from it and people mentioned it. And several people wanted to even more specifically ask why. And to use some of the terminology since then, I could say, well, one of the reasons is a reaction, a still beckoning to the basic call of the herd. Is the more simplistic, the more the person is wired up still, that their center of gravity is more just at the physical survival level. They're not quite up to the middle of the life's parade. The more, it is as though they're searching for companionship. It is as though they're looking for the chance of approval. It's as though, you might find it in here, it's as though they continue to look over their shoulder, if it's a man, let's say, that perchance there's going to be a woman suddenly come by and whistle at him. Or a woman come by, and if he doesn't look around, she might go by and pull down, her blouse or something, and he'll miss it. It's like they're continually looking for approval, continually looking for some other friendly face of humanity, but it is really a continuing drive, a reaction to the continuing strong call in them of the herd instinct. Whereas my college professor, using these extreme examples, my mathematician, he'll be walking along, and by and large, compared to the first example, he does not heed to any similar degree, it's still extant in him, but the call of the herd. Now, all this is no secret. I mean, people are aware of this through experience. They just don't have any cause to analyze it. The more a person is a so-called intellectual, the more he is living in the yellow circuit, the more that's his home base, the less has he a need. It's very likely he may not have a girlfriend. It's more likely when you get into the higher socioeconomic brackets, to use common parlance, the more likely it is to find people unmarried in adult age. Whereas my bricklayer, you'd be hard-pressed today to find one that's only been married once. They for damn sure got a girlfriend, or if it's the other way around. But the intellectual, and he will have probably a very, not probably, he will definitely have a smaller circle of friends. There'll be just a core group of people with whom he may hang out. Whereas the bricklayer will have probably a loose floating 2 or 3 groups and subgroups. He is simply a more social being than the bricklayer. That would sound like, at any rate, I reacted to some people, responded, and they went, last time I was leading up to this, there was a news item that said there's no such thing as single reasons, only multiple ones. That would seem to respond to, if you're following this right quick, that would seem to offer a legitimate reason of why more physical people, the closer they are still to the old survival instinctive level, the more that they are prone to look around, just because they are more of a family, a herd, a social animal than those, it's neither right or wrong from an objective level, but to intellectuals, to those living in their head who are less heeding the call, the old survival instinctive. So in other words, like I say, all right, the reason that the lower classes, the simpler, the physical people walking on the highways continue to turn around is they are seeking companionship. And I'm saying seeking in the broadest possible term. They're always open to it. They're always trying to respond. The chance, they're walking on the highway, and it's as though they keep turning around as though there's thousands of cars going to pass them. What's the chance of them knowing somebody? But it doesn't seem to bother them. It's like they look around because a stranger may come by and holler, "Hey man, how's it going?" And he may holler, "Hey, give me a ride." No telling what will happen, right? So apparently they are just answering the random survival call of the herd. Yeah, that's just one reason. And there is no such thing as one reason. Let me tell you another reason they do it. Self-protection. They don't think of either one of these. But the closer you are to the survival level, the more you'll look around, because the more you feel threatened by the environment. And they do not think of this. No one thinks about it. And conversely, those living more in the mind, in the yellow circuit, do not think otherwise. In fact, criminals, off on a side little thing, but every now and then I know this pops up, that some reformed mugger will try and give tips of how to avoid being mugged in a large metro area. And they will say things like, well, don't just be staring down and looking like you don't know what you're doing. Stay alert. And he says, us muggers know. If we see some guy walk along and got his head down and looks like he's talking to himself, we know he's a patsy. And they don't know how to explain it. It almost makes sense. You go, and then the reporter, whoever's doing the interview, will go say, well, that's good words of advice for all of us. Thanks a lot for that, because, and they'll look at the camera, let's say it's a TV show, and the reporter say, and we should all remember, the lesson to be learned from this is when you're out, especially alone, out in a public place, unfamiliar neighborhood, at night, whatever, stay alert. And you think, well, by God, how can you argue with that? Except the intellectuals can hear that and walk right out the street and do that same thing. There was a king whose castle had a curious characteristic. The more activity there was inside, the less protected it was. The simple walk down the highway and they keep looking around, and part of the fact is they're seeking companionship. They're responding to it. They're not initiating. They're simply heeding the call of the old survival herd instinct. But they're also reacting, without them knowing it, to their perceived constant state of possible danger. They are less likely to get mugged. They are less likely to be attacked. If not by another person, they're less likely to be walking down there and suddenly this huge pit bull jump out behind a bush and take off part of their ankle. Whereas an intellectual can be walking along, pondering something, and a dog could probably get 2 bites out of him before he goes down. We all know that. There's a way. Does anybody think we changed the subject? There's not just one cause for anything, nor is there just one way to do anything. And if you describe it as being one way, you either don't know what you're talking about, or the people that you're talking to can't hear it, and so you got to put it that way. So I'll leave it to you. You can get overly. That was a theatrical cough. You can get overly, shall we say, busy inside the castle, inside your own balloon. You can understand that that is a normal form of captivity. That is a normal form of confinement. That is a normal straitjacket out of which no man can squirm, out of which hardly anybody ever alive ever sees it as being a form of confinement. And if they do, they immediately weasel out of it by saying, well, now that you pointed it out, I'll work on it. And they will not. They're still operating under the auspices of the do-right rule. There is no way, put it to you another way, until a man realizes, and I know that some people will go, yeah, but you got to realize it yourself. Until a man realizes, a good 40, 50-year-old person, good education, well-read, active in life, not a hermit, a person right out there, several careers, good hobbies, until they realize that their intellectual life amounts to 1 or 2 hit records, 1 or 2 stanzas, that to call their normal flow of thought, to call their intellectual life, taken in a 4-dimensional, the reality of it for the last 40 years, that thing amounts to nothing but a small number of habitual thoughts, over and over and over, and you got to realize it. When you realize that, then you realize that there is something that a man can do without worrying about specifically what to try and throw into the hopper of thinking, like, well, I remember the name of God and it'll help interfere with this, or I'll just stop trying to think, which, good luck. Another one is, I could describe this as blood moving from the brain in another direction, but you asked me not to do that, so I agreed not to, all right? So I'm not going to do that. There was a king whose castle had a curious characteristic, that the greater the activity within, the less protection it had. It wouldn't seem that far from, let's use one's temples, let's use one's eyeballs if you like. How far is it literally, physically, from the center of consciousness, from the frontal lobes? Not far. Far enough. Far enough. There's a way that you can direct, I'm going to say energy instead of blood since that frightens everybody. Instead of it continuing to be churned up in the same old way, the same old waves, you can turn it to a kind of guardianship of the castle itself, I suggest to you, to great possible benefit. I told you to be simple and straightforward tonight. Well, don't be crude. You don't need to be nasty about it.